The night had already fallen over the bustling streets of Mexico City, but inside the office of Galvan and Torres, the lights still burned brightly on the 47th floor. The sound of typing echoed through the modern glass-walled building, where the city below seemed like a maze of lights and motion. Lupita Sanchez, the night cleaner, pushed her cart down the marble corridors, her sneakers barely making a sound against the cold stone. Her beige uniform was stained with years of hard work, but her eyes still held a glimmer of determination, a spark that no one ever noticed. Tonight, like every night, she carried her law textbooks in her bag, the ones she had saved up for with her meager wages, the ones she studied late into the night when the cleaning shift was over. Lupita had always dreamed of becoming a lawyer, of entering rooms like the one she cleaned, not to wipe the dust away, but to take part in the discussions that shaped the future. She paused at the door of the main conference room, where voices could be heard through the thick wooden door, men discussing multi-million-dollar contracts, their laughter carrying through the walls. She had always wondered what it would be like to sit at that table, to speak her mind, to be heard. With a soft sigh, she pulled out her tattered book of constitutional law and began to skim through it. French was the language of international law, and Lupita had spent years learning it on her own, mastering it word by word, not for anyone else, but for herself. Suddenly, the door to the conference room flung open, and a tall figure appeared in the doorway, almost like a shadow. It was Marco Galvan, the CEO of the firm. Dressed in a tailored suit, his cold gaze fixed on her as he stepped out of the room. His reputation as a ruthless businessman preceded him. Everyone in the office feared him. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Trying to impress someone while you clean the floors, Lupita?" Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood up quickly, holding her book tightly to her chest. "This is mine, Mr. Galvan," she said softly, though the words were firm. Galvan's sharp blue eyes flicked to the book, then back to her face. A slight smirk curled on his lips. "A cleaning lady studying law? That's rich. What do you think you're going to become one of us?" he sneered. Lupita felt a fire rise in her chest. She knew who he was, the self-made billionaire who had built the firm from nothing, but that didn't mean he had the right to look down on her. "I study because I want to learn, not to impress anyone," she said, her voice steady. For a brief moment, Galvan seemed intrigued, as if he had stumbled upon something he hadn't expected. "You're right. You do have ambition," he said, his tone suddenly more calculated. "Why don't you prove it? Come in and show me what you can do." Her breath caught in her throat. She had no business being inside that room, yet the challenge in his eyes pulled her forward. She hesitated for only a moment before walking into the conference room, gripping her book like a shield. The room was filled with the scent of expensive cigars and tension. Several well-dressed lawyers sat around a large oak table, papers scattered in front of them, the faint sound of clinking glasses in the background. Marco gestured toward a thick legal contract laid out in front of him. "Let's see if she's really as smart as she thinks she is," he said, tossing the contract across the table toward Lupita. "Translate this section. If you're so great, you should be able to handle this." Lupita picked up the contract, feeling the weight of the room's gaze upon her. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially not in a place like this, but she took a deep breath, scanned the document, and began to translate in a clear, steady voice. As she read the legal terms aloud, she could feel the others shifting uncomfortably. When she finished, she looked up. "This clause is wrong," she said, her voice cold. "The translation leaves out crucial information that could cost the company millions. You missed a deadline clause that could bankrupt you if it's signed." The room fell silent. Galvan stared at her, his jaw tight. The other lawyers exchanged glances, clearly unnerved. "How could we have missed this?" one of them muttered. Lupita didn't wait for an answer. She simply stood up, gathered her things, and walked out of the room, leaving behind a stunned silence. As she stepped into the hallway, her heart was pounding, but she felt a surge of triumph. She had done it. She had shown them that she was more than just a cleaner. Marco Galvan watched her leave, the surprise in his eyes fading to something darker, something unfamiliar. The next morning, Lupita stood in front of the large glass doors of Galvan and Torres, the early sun casting long shadows on the polished floors. Her shift was about to start, but she couldn't shake the feeling that things had changed overnight. The events of the previous evening had left her feeling both elated and uneasy, a mix of pride in herself and fear of the consequences. Her footsteps echoed through the empty halls as she prepared to begin her usual routine. The cleaning supplies were in her cart, but today it felt heavier, like the weight of the entire office was pressing down on her. As she walked down the hall, she passed a group of high-level lawyers speaking in low voices. They barely acknowledged her presence, but Lupita could feel their eyes following her, a strange tension in the air. She had been part of this world for years, but never had she felt as exposed as she did now. Her involvement in the conference room incident had not gone unnoticed. Lupita stopped at the break room to grab a cup of coffee, but as she entered, she found Marco Galvan sitting at the counter, his face tense and deep in thought. His sharp eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither spoke. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out who you are?" he asked finally, his voice low and edged with something like amusement, though there was no humor in his eyes. "You've got guts, Lupita. I'll give you that." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the coffee cup. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble, Mr. Galvan," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I just want to do what's right." He stared at her, his lips pressing into a thin line. "You've done more than that, Lupita. You've caught my attention. But let me make one thing clear." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze unblinking. "You may think you're playing the same game as everyone else, but you're not. You're nothing but a distraction in a place that doesn't have room for distractions. People like you, they don't belong here." Lupita's heart skipped a beat, but she stood tall. "I'm here because I earned my place," she said, her voice steady. "I won't apologize for that." He smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see about that. You've got potential, Lupita, but potential alone doesn't get you far around here." His words stung, but she refused to let him see her pain. She was no longer the invisible woman she had been the day before. She had shown them that she was more than just a cleaner. Now, the question was whether she would be allowed to continue her journey or be crushed under the weight of their scorn. Lupita returned to her work, determined to remain unfazed. Yet, as she cleaned the executive offices, she overheard snippets of conversation from the lawyers who passed by. They spoke in low voices, but their words were sharp, cutting through the air. "Did you hear about the cleaning lady? She's not just some maid, she's trying to get into law school, or so I hear. She's just trying to get attention. It's pathetic. She's a joke. Let's see how long she lasts before she gets in over her head." The whispers dug into her like 1,000 tiny daggers. They didn't see her as an equal. They saw her as nothing more than a pawn, a joke, someone who didn't belong. But Lupita refused to let them define her. Later that day, Marco called her into his office. His eyes narrowed when she stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing her inside with him. "Sit down, Lupita," he said, his tone cold. Lupita sat, her back straight, though her stomach churned. She had no idea what he wanted, but she wasn't going to back down. "Let me be clear," he started, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. "What you did last night, that was impressive. But don't get any ideas." His gaze was sharp. "You're not one of us. I may have been curious about you, but I don't have time for distractions. If you think you can just waltz in here and change everything with your little tricks, you're mistaken." She met his eyes, refusing to show fear. I didn't ask for anything. I'm just trying to survive. Marco leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her. Survival isn't enough in this world, Lupita. You'll either get eaten alive, or you'll sell your soul for a seat at the table. And trust me, you don't want to sell yours. His words sent a chill down her spine, but she held her ground. I'm not here to beg for a seat, she said firmly. I'm here to fight for what's mine. If you think I'll back down now, you're wrong. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Marco's lips curled into a thin smile, almost impressed by her audacity. You've got spirit, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. But spirit alone won't win you battles, and you'll be fighting alone in this office if you're not careful. Lupita stood up, feeling the weight of his words, but her resolve only strengthened. She wasn't going to let fear dictate her future. She had come too far. Is that all, Mr. Galvan? She asked, her voice steady. For now, he replied, his voice cold. But there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. Lupita left his office without looking back. The game had just begun.
The next few days at Galvan and Torres felt like walking through a minefield. Lupita could sense the change in the air. The office, which once felt like a distant dream, now felt like a battleground, with every step she took bringing her closer to something inevitable. The whispers behind her back had grown louder, their words laced with mockery and disdain. The other employees, those who once ignored her, now treated her with a cold indifference. She had become a curiosity, a subject of gossip, but not in the way she had hoped. They saw her as a threat to their carefully constructed world, a world where only the privileged and well-connected truly belonged. As Lupita cleaned the gleaming floors of the top floor, she couldn't help but overhear more of the conversations. Some were dismissive, some were downright cruel. Did you hear she actually thinks she can become a lawyer? One of the junior lawyers sneered. She'll be back to cleaning soon enough. Another added, voice dripping with scorn. Lupita clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had expected resistance, but the cruelty stung more than she had anticipated. Still, she forced herself to focus on her work, knowing that this was just a test. She wasn't going to let their words define her. Later that week, she was summoned to Marco Galvan's office once again. This time, however, the message was different. It wasn't an invitation for a challenge or a moment to prove herself. It felt more like a warning. She walked into his office with a heavy heart, but her face remained neutral. Marco was already seated at his desk, his eyes scanning a stack of papers. His demeanor was colder than usual. Sit down, he said without looking up. Lupita obeyed, though her mind raced with questions. Why was he calling her again? What did he want now? Marco didn't waste any time. I've been hearing things, Lupita, he began, his voice devoid of warmth. Your little stunt last week hasn't gone unnoticed. The partners aren't happy, and neither am I. Lupita swallowed, but her voice was steady. I didn't do anything wrong. I just pointed out an error in the contract. Marco finally looked up, his gaze sharp and calculating. You think you're some kind of hero? You think you're saving the company from disaster? He leaned forward, his voice lowering to a dangerous tone. You're not a hero, Lupita. You're a nuisance, a distraction. Her pulse quickened, but she refused to flinch. I'm just doing my job. I've been studying law for years, and if I can contribute something useful, then I will. Marco chuckled bitterly, shaking his head. Your job is to clean, not to lecture us on law. You've gotten lucky a couple of times, but trust me, your luck is running out. This is your last chance, Lupita. Lupita's stomach twisted. She had expected the coldness, but hearing it out loud was something else. She had crossed a line, and now she was being forced to pay the price. Last chance for what? She asked, though she already knew the answer. For you to stop trying to act like one of us, Marco replied, his eyes hard as steel. You'll go back to your cleaning duties, and I'll make sure everyone knows this little experiment is over. Do you understand? Lupita took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of her dreams slowly slipping out of her grasp, but she wasn't ready to give up, not yet. I understand, she said quietly, standing up. But I won't stop studying. I won't stop learning. Marco's eyes narrowed, a flash of anger passing over his face. "You're making a mistake, Lupita," he said coldly. "You can't fight the system. It's bigger than you." She stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Maybe I'm not fighting the system," she said softly. "Maybe I'm just fighting for myself." Without another word, she turned and left the office, the door closing behind her with a sharp click. Her heart was racing, but she knew one thing for certain: she wasn't going to back down. The following days felt like walking on eggshells. Marco's warning echoed in her mind, and the whispers in the office grew louder. She was isolated now, more than ever. The lawyers she once respected now treated her like an outsider, a threat to their comfortable world, but Lupita refused to be silenced. She continued to study in secret, late into the night after her cleaning shift was over. Her books, worn and battered, became her escape from the coldness of the office, her only refuge in a world that seemed to reject her at every turn. One evening, as she was walking out of the office, after another long night, a familiar voice called her name. She turned to see CSAR Ortega, one of the senior partners, approaching her. He was tall, well-groomed, and wore a look of calculated politeness. "I need to speak with you, Lupita," he said, his voice smooth but laced with something she couldn't quite place. "Of course, Mr. Ortega," she replied, her heart racing. With both curiosity and caution, he gestured for her to walk with him, and they headed toward the elevator. Once inside, CSAR pressed the button for the lobby. The elevator hummed softly as they descended. "I've been hearing some interesting things about you," he began, his voice low and almost too friendly. "You're studying law on your own, aren't you?" Lupita nodded cautiously. "Yes, I've been teaching myself for a few years." CSAR studied her for a moment, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite interpret. "And I hear you've been offering unsolicited legal advice to the team." She met his gaze, her expression neutral. "I'm just trying to help," he nodded, though the smile on his lips didn't reach his eyes. "I admire your determination, but I need to warn you, Lupita. There are people here who won't take kindly to your ambitions. You need to be careful. People don't like being shown up by someone like you." Lupita felt a chill creep up her spine. "I'm not trying to show anyone up. I just want a chance to prove myself." CSAR's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "That's the problem, Lupita. You are not here to prove anything. You're here to clean. Don't forget that." The elevator dinged, and the doors opened. CSAR stepped out, leaving Lupita standing in the cold glow of the lobby lights. His words lingered in the air like smoke, threatening, suffocating. She didn't know what he was planning, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let anyone push her back into the shadows. The days blurred together in a haze of tension and uncertainty. Lupita continued her work, her cart of cleaning supplies becoming a constant companion in the vast halls of Galvin and Tours. Every time she passed the glass walls of the sleek offices, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the world bearing down on her. The whispers about her had only grown louder, more venomous. Some of the junior lawyers, the ones she had once shared a passing smile with, now gave her looks filled with judgment and disdain. They didn't speak to her anymore, and when they did, their words were filled with condescension. Every time she entered a room, the atmosphere shifted. She was no longer just the quiet woman who cleaned the floors. She was the subject of everyone's ridicule. I'd heard. But Lupita was learning not to care. It was just noise. She had a purpose, and nothing was going to stop her from chasing that dream, even if it meant standing alone. But then, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, Lupita was cleaning the kitchen area when she noticed CSAR Ortega standing by the coffee machine, speaking to a younger lawyer she didn't recognize. CSAR's eyes flicked toward her for a brief moment, and he gave a polite, but almost imperceptible nod before returning to his conversation. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was different today. As she continued with her cleaning, she overheard CSAR mention something that made her blood run cold. "I'm telling you, she's a liability," he said quietly. "If this keeps going, we'll have to let her go. She's more trouble than she's worth." The words hit Lupita like a slap to the face. Let her go? She didn't even realize she had stopped cleaning until she noticed the sharp scrape of her broom against the tiles. The shock of it was too much for her to process all at once. She had worked so hard to get this far, to make herself noticed, and now it was all being threatened. She quickly finished her shift and left the office early, her mind in a whirlwind of thoughts. Lupita had always known that there would be obstacles, that it wouldn't be easy, but this felt different. It felt like the walls were closing in on her, that all her dreams were slipping through her fingers like sand that night as Lupita sat at the small kitchen table of her cramped apartment. Her mind refused to quiet. Her mother, Teresa, lay in the next room, still too weak to do much but rest. Lupita had always kept a brave face for her mother, but tonight, the weight of everything was too much to bear. She buried her face in her hands, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over her. "Mom," she whispered, though her voice cracked. "I don't know how much longer I can keep going. I don't know if I can win this fight," Teresa's voice, faint but filled with warmth, answered from the other room. "You don't need to win it all at once, Lupita. Take it step by step. My girl, you've come this far, haven't you?" Lupita wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had come far farther than she ever thought possible. But was it enough? Was it enough to keep her going when everything seemed to be falling apart? The following day, as Lupita walked to work, she kept replaying CSR's words in her mind. If they were going to fire her, she would have to face it head on. She couldn't afford to keep living in fear of losing her job, not when it felt like she was so close to breaking through. When she arrived at the office, she was met with a cold silence from the employees she passed in the hall. No one greeted her. No one looked her in the eye. It was as if she had become invisible to them once again, and it hurt more than she cared to admit. But today, Lupita wasn't about to let it break her. She entered the cleaning closet, grabbed her supplies, and began her rounds as usual. This time, however, she was more focused. Her movements were deliberate, her thoughts sharp. She wasn't just cleaning the office. She was preparing for a fight, whether they realized it or not. By mid-afternoon, Marco Galvin's assistant appeared in the hallway, a thin smile on her face. "Mr. Galvin wants to see you," she said, her tone businesslike, with just a hint of something darker lurking behind her eyes. Lupita's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment she had been dreading, and yet she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm wash over her. Whatever was coming, she was ready. When she stepped into Marco's office, he didn't look up from his desk. His expression was as cold and unreadable as ever. "Sit down," he instructed, his voice flat. Lupita sat, her spine straight. "You wanted to see me." Marco didn't answer immediately. He shuffled through some papers on his desk as if toying with her. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and looked her straight in the eye. "I don't know what game you think you're playing, Lupita," he said, his voice low. "But you're not going to win it." Lupita took a breath. "I'm not trying to play any game. I'm just trying to prove myself." "Prove yourself?" Marco scoffed. "To who? To me? To them? This place doesn't care about your dreams, Lupita. You're just a cleaner here. That's where you belong. Don't think for a second that you're going to change that. You'll never be one of us." His words cut deeper than anything else had. But Lupita didn't flinch. She had heard worse in her life, and she would hear worse again. What mattered now was how she responded. "I'm not here to be one of you, Mr. Galvin," she said firmly, her voice steady. "I'm here because I deserve to be. I've worked for this. I've fought for this. And no matter what you or anyone else thinks, I'm not going anywhere." Marco's eyes flashed with something: surprise, frustration, maybe even respect. But he didn't show it. He merely sighed and looked away. "You're wasting your time," he muttered, then looked up. "But I'll give you one last chance. Get back to your cleaning, Lupita. Stay in your lane, or else I'll have no choice but to let you go." Lupita stood up, her resolve stronger than ever. "You can't control me anymore, Mr. Galvin. I won't back down." Without another word, she turned and walked out of his office, her heart pounding in her chest. This time, she wasn't walking away defeated. She was walking away with fire in her soul. The following days were quieter than Lupita had expected. There were no more confrontations with Marco Galvin, no more whispered conversations behind her back. But the silence was deafening. It was the kind of silence that told you that something bigger was brewing, something that you couldn't yet see but knew was coming. Lupita continued her cleaning duties, though her heart was no longer in it the same way. She worked through the halls, past the office doors where lawyers sat in meetings, their voices muffled behind closed walls. It felt like they were all part of a different world, a world she didn't belong to, and perhaps never would. But she refused to let it break her. Every evening, she would sit at her small kitchen table, her law books open in front of her, her eyes burning with exhaustion. Still, she studied. She memorized case laws, translated French legal terms, and practiced her arguments in front of a mirror. She couldn't afford to stop now. Not when she was so close. One evening, as Lupita was walking home from work, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, expecting a reminder for a cleaning shift or some other mundane office task. But when she looked at the screen, her stomach twisted. It was an email from CSAR Ortega. Lupita, I need to speak with you. Meet me at the CAF across from the office at PM. I have something important to discuss. CSAR Ortega. Lupita stopped walking for a moment, her heart racing. Why was CSAR reaching out to her? After everything that had happened, it didn't make sense. Had he been the one behind the rumors? Was this some kind of trap? Or was it something else entirely? By the time the evening came, Lupita found herself standing outside the CAF, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities. She hadn't expected CSAR to be waiting for her, but when she walked inside, she found him seated at a corner table, his usual calm demeanor replaced with something more serious, more urgent. Lupita, he said as she sat down, his voice low and carefully controlled. I've been thinking about what happened, and I know you've been under a lot of pressure. Lupita raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. Pressure? You mean the way everyone's been treating me like I don't belong? CSAR didn't flinch. Yes, exactly that. But that's not what I want to talk about. I think you deserve better than this. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers. You've been underestimated, Lupita, and I've been watching. She blinked, confused. Watching? What do you mean? I mean, he continued, that you've shown something that no one else here has. You're not just trying to fit into this world, you're trying to change it. And that's not something I see every day. Lupita felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't sure if she should be flattered or afraid. What are you getting at, CSAR? CSAR paused, his gaze flickering around the room as though making sure no one was listening. I've spoken to some people, and we want to offer you an opportunity. A real opportunity. You've proven yourself, Lupita, and that deserves more than just a cleaning cart and whispered insults. Lupita felt her breath catch in her throat. What kind of opportunity? He slid a piece of paper across the table to her. It was an offer, an official one. It detailed a legal assistant position with a salary that would allow her to leave her cleaning job behind. But there was more. It was a chance to learn from the firm's best, to work directly under CSAR's guidance, and to finally put her legal knowledge to use in a professional setting. Lupita's hands shook as she picked up the paper. This was it. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of, but something didn't sit right with her. She had earned everything on her own, fought for every scrap of knowledge and every chance to prove herself. Was this just another way to use her? Was she being offered this because they finally saw her as a valuable asset, or because they were trying to silence her? CSAR watched her closely, sensing her hesitation. You're not just a cleaner, Lupita, he said softly. You're a force, and that's why I'm offering you this. You don't have to keep fighting alone. She stared at the offer for a long moment, her mind racing. The promise of a better life, of finally breaking free from the shadows of the office. Was it worth accepting? Was she ready to trust CSAR, someone who had been a part of the very system that had tried to crush her? I'll need some time to think about it, Lupita said finally, her voice firm but tinged with uncertainty. CSAR nodded, his expression unreadable. Of course, take all the time you need. But know this, there's no one else here who's done what you've done. No one else has the heart, the drive, or the intelligence to go as far as you can. Lupita stood up, still clutching the offer in her hand. As she walked out of the CAF, the weight of the decision pressed down on her. She had fought so hard to be seen as more than just a cleaner, to be seen as someone worthy of respect. But now, she had to decide if this was truly her chance, or just another way for the system to control her. Back at her apartment, Lupita lay awake, the offer resting on the table beside her. She couldn't stop thinking about the words Marco had said to her, about CSAR's offer, and about everything she had worked for. And then the thought came to her, I'm not just fighting for me anymore. I'm fighting for every woman who has ever been silenced, for every person who has ever been told they don't belong. The decision wasn't just about her future, it was about the future she wanted to build. She wasn't going to settle. She wasn't going to let anyone dictate her worth. The next morning, Lupita made up her mind. She walked into the office, her heart pounding with resolve. She had already proved herself once. Now, it was time to prove she was more than just a cleaner. The sun had barely risen over Mexico City as Lupita walked through the gates of Galvin and Tours once again. The world felt different today, her footsteps lighter, her mind clearer. She had made her decision. No more waiting, no more second-guessing. She had worked too hard to let this chance slip away. She stepped into the building, greeted by the usual cool air of the lobby, the polished floors reflecting the bright lights above. But today, it all felt different. For the first time, she wasn't just walking in as a cleaner, an outsider. She was walking in with a purpose, with her own power. The moment she entered the elevator, she felt the weight of everything she had fought for, the late nights, the rejections, the constant feeling of being underestimated suddenly shifting in her favor. She wasn't the same Lupita who had walked through these halls with nothing but a broom and dreams of something better. She was stronger now, more determined, and no one could take that away from her. When the elevator doors opened to the top floor, Lupita stepped out, her heart pounding in her chest. She walked toward Marco Galvin's office with a steady, purposeful stride. No longer was she afraid of him or what he could do. She had already faced worse than anything he could throw her way. The door to Marco's office was ajar, and Lupita didn't hesitate. She knocked once, then pushed it open, her gaze fixed on Marco, who was seated at his desk, the ever-present air of authority surrounding him. "Lupita," he said, looking up from his paperwork, his tone casual, almost dismissive. "I wasn't expecting you this early. I'm sure you weren't," Lupita replied, her voice calm but firm. She took a step forward, not waiting for an invitation to sit. "I've made my decision." Marco raised an eyebrow, but he didn't speak, his cold eyes studying her. She could feel the weight of his judgment, but it didn't faze her. "I'm not accepting your offer," Lupita continued, her words clear and unwavering. "I've spent my entire life fighting for opportunities like this, and I'm not going to let anyone tell me where I belong. I've earned my place here, and I'm not going to sell myself out for a spot at the table." A flicker of something surprise, maybe even respect passed through Marco's eyes, but it was gone in an instant. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "So you think you can make it on your own?" he asked, his tone still laced with disbelief. "You think you're ready for this world?" Lupita nodded. "I'm ready. I've already done the hard part. I didn't wait for anyone to give me permission. I've earned my knowledge, my skills, and I'm going to prove that I can succeed without anyone's help, especially not someone like you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and charged. Marco said nothing for a moment, his gaze narrowing as if calculating his next move. But Lupita held her ground. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her anymore. "You're making a mistake," Marco said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "You could have had everything. You could have been one of us." Lupita felt a flicker of anger rise in her chest. "I don't want to be one of you," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "I want to be me. And if you can't accept that, then it's your problem, not mine." Marco's eyes darkened, but Lupita wasn't afraid anymore. "I don't need your approval. I don't need your pity. I've spent too much of my life fighting for respect, and I won't let you take that away from me now, for a moment." The room was still, as if the weight of her words had hit Marco harder than he expected. He sat there, his jaw clenched, watching her with something that could almost be called admiration. Finally, Marco sighed and stood up, straightening his suit. "I hope you're not making a mistake, Lupita. But if you're so sure, then I guess there's nothing more to say." Lupita didn't say anything. She simply turned and walked toward the door, her steps firm and confident. She had said everything she needed to say. Now, all that was left was to prove it. As she walked down the hall toward the elevator, she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over her. The weight that had been pressing down on her for so long, the fear, the doubt, the feeling of being small, had finally lifted. She was no longer fighting alone. She was fighting for herself, and that was enough. The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime, and for the first time, Lupita felt like she was on the verge of something bigger. The city below seemed to pulse with possibility, the lights of Mexico City flickering like stars in the distance. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. It was hers to claim. The following days were a blur. Lupita continued her work, her studies, and her fight. She took on small cases, volunteered at local legal clinics, and used every opportunity to learn and grow. Slowly, she built a reputation not as a cleaner, but as someone with real legal knowledge, someone who could contribute to the world in a meaningful way. Months later, Lupita stood in front of the very building that had once felt like an insurmountable wall. She had come full circle. She wasn't just fighting for a place in the world anymore. She was fighting to change it. And as she entered Galvin and Tours once again, this time not as a cleaner, but as a legal intern, she knew that this was only the beginning. In her heart, she carried the knowledge that no one could take away what she had earned. Not Marco, not CSAR, no one. She had found her place not by asking for it, but by claiming it. And she was just getting started. Epilogue. The promised 4 years later, Lupita stood before a packed courtroom, her heart pounding with anticipation. She was no longer just a student or an intern. She was a fully fledged lawyer, ready to make her mark. As she presented her case with passion and conviction, she caught a glimpse of someone in the audience, a familiar face. Marco Galvin sat in the back, his expression unreadable. But in that moment, Lupita didn't need his approval. She had already proven everything she needed to prove. When the case was over and the verdict in her favor was announced, Lupita walked out of the courtroom, her head held high. She had done it on her own terms, with her own strength. And as she stepped into the sunlight, she knew that her journey was far from over. The world was hers to change.